Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stare at Stats. I'm Cade Kennedy alongside Tyler Riggs. And Tyler, we have made it to the final big conference football preview. We're going to add Notre Dame in as well to the rest of the ACC. They're a member in other sports, so,
So
we'll count them in here to
might as
make
well
sure
throw
we
them
get them
Yeah.
covered as well. But, of course, before we get into this, we're getting closer and closer to football season every single day. So if you want to get even more coverage from us, folks, feel free to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all those fun things, and leave a comment down below. Tell us what you think we got wrong, what we got right. If you just want to argue for the sake of arguing, I really don't care. If you just want to leave whatever, have at it.
Do you have a team that you want to push some propaganda on like I do? By all means, throw it in there.
Yeah, so you have to go back and see our just our history of doing this. I mean, it's crazy to think about. Not to divert too much before we get into this thing, because I'm sure people would rather hear about Florida State than our other stuff. But I mean, it's crazy to think about just going back, watching the last years, just seeing things. And I mean, I was sure it'll be the same way this year. Just anything we were dead right on, or just completely way off.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, I won't then. But starting with Florida State, I think we'll both be in agreement here. Mike Norvell, fourth year, 10-3 last year. Florida State, you want to talk about weapons. Jordan Travis at quarterback, Trey Benson at wide receiver, Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson at wide receiver. You've got Jared Verse playing on the edge. This is a Florida State team that no matter what side of the ball you're on, they've got weapons everywhere. They've got playmakers. They've got guys that can flat out play, Tyler.
They do, and I got to give Mike Norvell credit because early in this process, you remember one of the first big things that happened in his tenure is they lost a recruit to Jackson State and Coach Sanders, right? Number one overall guy. And I thought, man, boy, if he can't even out-recruit that, that's tough. But he's done an excellent job so far in really getting this Florida State team back to legit contention. Jordan Travis is the truth. This is a guy that would not surprise me if he finds himself in a spot to contend for the Heisman by the end of the year, providing he stays healthy. And Florida State, Cade, I think, has a legit shot. I mean, you look at the schedule, you got that LSU game will be tough. But after that, I mean, I don't think they see a tougher team on the schedule. And I think they've got a legit chance to compete really on a national stage. I mean, ideally, you host LSU there. Yes, at Clemson is going to be tough, don't get me wrong. But as long as you win one of those two and you take care of the rest of the schedule, they can make the argument that going into the Pac or the ACC championship game that they may deserve a spot in the college football playoff.
I mean, this feels like the year for Florida State.
Yeah.
I mean, they had such a great season last year. You could see everything really starting to come together at the end, and a lot of guys wanted to come back because they felt this was the year. This is everything they had been working towards. This was their year to put all the pieces together. You start with LSU. We've already talked about LSU if you've watched our SEC preview. LSU, Florida State, I mean, it was a great game last year in New Orleans. Now it's in Orlando, our fun, not neutral sites.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a blast. It's going to be a fun, Sunday night game. We don't get many of those. Florida State, you win that game and you beat Clemson. We were talking about this during our little breaks here before we got ready to get this thing going. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, all you have Miami, but we'll get to my opinions on Miami. Miami is in a weird limbo spot. When have they not been, though, the last 20 years?
Sure.
But, I mean, you look at it, Florida's down, Miami's down. There's Wake doesn't have, Sam Hartman. They don't have the same skill that they had earlier. There's really no one left to challenge them. And your other games of teams that kind of can poke around every once in a while, maybe a Syracuse, Duke, or Virginia Tech that can sneak up on you, those are all in Tallahassee.
Yeah, and that's, when we talk about the conference, and we'll talk about it as we go, really it's, Florida State, Clemson, and then North Carolina's kind of separated from those two, but above the rest, that's really kind of everybody else, in this conference. So, yeah, you get past those two big games early, and then sky's the limit. We'll differ a little bit on Miami, I think, but that's a home game anyways late in the season. So, it's just it all lines up for Florida State. You mentioned it. You got the weapons everywhere, quarterback solved. The defense could get even better, and it was pretty solid last year. So, if Norvell plays it right, this could be that team that, as we're talking about, maybe is the one that breaks through, kind of breaks Clemson's stranglehold that had been on the conference up until last year.
And, I mean, it kind of reminds me, Florida State, back when we saw the rise of Clemson. We saw that beating Florida State for them was that kind of breaking moment in the chain. And now we see it coming back from the other way. Florida State, if you remember, a decade ago, Jameis Winston and company going in and just dismantling any shot of Clemson doing anything. I think it was a 52-13 beatdown or something like that. I'm not going to say that it's going to be that type of game, obviously, but this is the first time since that kind of era that we've seen that Florida State Clemson has that feel to it of like, oh, this is going to be a must-see game, that the ACC is on the line. The only thing I wish is that this game was in like late October, early November. That's just more of a schedule-making issue on my part. Because to me, unless something crazy happens, you're determining the ACC in September.
Essentially, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the only bad thing there is we'll get to Clemson in a moment, but I don't really see either of those two being hugely challenged unless it's North Carolina.
No, yeah. I mean, and Florida State doesn't even, they ducked the North Carolina matchup, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. I think very well could be decided right there, smack dab early in the season.
And that brings us to, Clemson. And you look at Clemson's schedule, they do the Monday night game in Durham taking on Duke and Charleston Southern, Florida Atlantic, and there's that Florida State matchup. You look at the same schedule. Clemson has a rougher road. They do have that at Miami, at NC State, Notre Dame at home. They have North Carolina and South Carolina. Their schedule's tougher than Florida State's is. But Clemson's got talent, too. They went 11-3 last year. Will Shipley returns at running back. You got to give Will Shipley the ball. I love him. He's just such a fun kid to watch. Yeah. And then Cade Klubnik returns. It's his team now. We have to see what Klubnik can do. And you look at the defense that Clemson has. Clemson's defense, Brent Venables is gone. That defense is still there, whether it be Andrew Makuba, whether it be Jeremiah Trotter, Nate Wiggins, Ruke Rohoro, anybody can step up and make a play for Clemson. They're still built to compete not only for the ACC but on that national stage.
Absolutely, and they brought in Garrett Riley as the offensive coordinator this year. Obviously, Brother Lincoln, very brilliant minds are the Rileys when it comes to offense. The only big question mark for Clemson, I think, is on the offense side of the ball. We talk about a lot of teams, who's throwing to some of these playmakers, or in the other case, who's around these quarterbacks. And I think for Clemson, it's a mixture, a little bit of both. The receiving core, probably the biggest question mark. It's been a long time of who's going to emerge as the top guy there. And then the offensive line, a little bit of shuffling there. Not going to be a bad offensive line, but just going to have to solidify early. And with the schedule, you do get kind of some time to do that before Florida State. And I guess that's the question, right? How quick can that solidify in those first three games? Because you're going to need it going into that Florida State game.
And, I mean, thankfully for Clemson, like you said, the three games there, you get your Charleston Southern, your Duke, and your Florida Atlantic. Now, Duke is a little bit intriguing.
It'll be a decent test to start.
They're picked to be one of the, kind of higher-up teams in the ACC. Not that big competing pile, but one of the best of the rest, so to speak. So that's a good opening shot there. You go to Syracuse. Wouldn't be Clemson-Syracuse without some weird hijinks happening in that game. I'm sure something wacky will happen there. But then Clemson's schedule, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, it's remotely tougher, but still, you would think they'd be in control of most of that schedule. Yes, it's at NC State. Yes, it's at Miami, but they aren't as threatening as they usually are.
No, and it's really those two later games, that Notre Dame and North Carolina game that you do get at home. Those are big ones, I think, and will be at that time. And then even that out South Carolina trip, that one kind of end of the season, depending on where both teams are at, could be interesting. So I think definitely Clemson gets a tougher path, has a bit more question marks. Still, though, Dabo and that staff have done a great job of just continuing to be able to win. So it's like we talk about with some of these teams, until they prove that they're really kind of taking a step back for whatever reason, we're going to assume that Clemson, like I said, is going to be put themselves in a chance to be kind of in control of what they need to do to either reach the ACC championship or be there competing maybe in the playoff race.
Yeah, they're the defending ACC champ for a reason. Whatever obstacles get thrown at them, they've always been able to overcome it. That brings us to North Carolina. North Carolina, obviously the third wheel, so to speak, in the Florida State-Clemson relationship here this year. Drake May is the guy. He is the hyped-up quarterback you've been hearing about. He was great last year. North Carolina went 9-5. Changing up the offense a bit, switching offensive coordinators. Phil Longo going to Wisconsin, of course. But you still got great weapons. You got Tez Walker, wide receiver. You got Bryson Nesbitt at tight end. You've got guys to go to if you want to air it out a little bit. But North Carolina's schedule, you look at it, and it's kind of that same Bleh area when you look at it, Tyler. You have the South Carolina game to start the year, and that's great. You have Clemson and your rivals in NC State to end the year. You have Duke as well down there, but everything in the middle besides one game against Minnesota is just kind of there.
Yeah, and even that Minnesota game isn't something, since you get to host it, I'm not as worried about that. I mean, they don't have, other than the Clemson game, they don't have anything that's, I would say, super, super threatening there, right? Something that you would think, okay, well, they might be a big-time underdog here. Should probably be the favorites, at least on paper right now, against pretty much all those opponents in that stretch we're talking about. It all hinges on, can this team protect Drake May? Can they improve defensively for whatever reason? So far, under Mac Brown there, defensively they haven't quite been there, in the way that I think he wants them to be. And offensively, they've been a little streaky at times, right? Where it all looks good, and then for a few stretches it's not there. But Drake May is just super talented. He's a guy that, is going to be mentioned right there with Caleb Williams as the best in the country, and rightfully so. And if all goes right, we'll contend again for a spot maybe in New York there for a Heisman. It's just, can you protect that guy and give enough time to really, let his X factor be that?
Yeah, and we'll have to see with North Carolina, because it's one of those, to me, if they can just get past South Carolina, which I think they have a really good shot to do, they're not challenged again until November, really. Yeah. They could easily be walking in, to Death Valley 10-0, and we're talking about a giant showdown in the ACC that late in the year. Right. But at the same time, if you can't get that defense improved, maybe you trip up against someone random like a Pitt or a Miami or someone like that, and then that can start that snowball effect we've seen time and time again with North Carolina, where you just start losing to teams that you're better than. Right. We saw with Georgia Tech last year, the one where it's 21-17, and you're just trying to think, how in the world did you only score 17 on this Georgia Tech team?
Well, and that's what happened at the end of the season, right? You start 9-1, then all of a sudden you lose your last three to end the season, and that's what it was. So, yeah, they got to make sure that those small details are tied up, because that's the difference for them. You can't afford some of those playing down to the level of your opponent's scenarios. You've got to be on top of it, especially if you want to compete. You've got the schedule that sets up like we're talking about, to where you can put yourself right there in the mix with Florida State and Clemson for a spot, maybe to put yourself not only in the conference championship game, but if things go right, maybe in the national title picture, put yourself in that top 10. So, it just comes down to that defense, and can you protect Drake May?
And that moves us on over to Miami. And Miami, taking my idea, the Battle of Miami. Miami of Florida versus Miami of Ohio, the first game. And Mario Cristobal, it's year 2. Miami went 5-7 last year. They had a rough go of it, to say the very least. I mean, this was a Miami team that I think we both had high expectations for last year. Did not come true in the slightest, to see what the Canes were doing. And you look at this year, and in the ACC, you look at a lot of these games, they're winnable on paper, but once again, it's that question of, can Miami rise to the occasion and play like they're capable of?
Yeah, their concern is, I see, 2 huge problems. At North Carolina, at Florida State. That's not easy. You do get Clemson at home. You got to play Texas A&M, though, early. That is a home game, but still, those 4 games right there, that's tough. That's going to make or break your season as far as where this team winds up. The positives for them, I guess you could say, the reasons that I feel like they didn't achieve last year. At least I was big on the Tyler Van Dyke hype train, so to speak. He just couldn't stay healthy. I mean, it just was one of those scenarios where couldn't stay healthy. The offense looked kind of out of sync because of that, and I don't know if it was an OC problem. They changed that. They brought in some big-time recruits on the offensive line to hopefully help solidify that side of it and give Van Dyke, some time back there because he's not a scrambler by any stretch, more of a traditional pocket guy. But it's one of those deals for Cristobal where he's under pressure to win immediately because last season was below expectations. That being said, though, Cade, those 4 games, A&M, Clemson, North Carolina, and Florida State, those are going to be tough ones to overcome. I don't know if the ceiling for this Miami team is past maybe 8 wins because of those 4 games.
And that's where I kind of think Miami's at, and I think it's one of those – if you're Miami at this point, I mean, we've tried to see how many times now. I talked about this with Florida in the SEC preview, where how many times have we seen, you come to Miami and your goals to immediately 9, 10 wins. I think at this point you've got to look at the approach. You've got to see that it's been 20 years since you've realistically competed for a national title. You've had, like the 16 or 17 team where they started out 10-0, played really well.
Yeah.
You can still get that type of team. That's not impossible at Miami. But at the same time, you've got to be able to slowly build this thing up. You've got to, Cristobal's starting to get some results here and there. You're starting to see the recruiting trail go. But if you go, 5-7 this year, that's absolutely catastrophic. And I could see one to pull the plug right away. But if you get what I think will probably happen, like a 7-5 or an 8-4, you just got to slowly start building this thing up. Miami's getting to the point where you cannot rush this thing.
Yeah, and that's, it's weird that in college football the most valuable asset for some of these coaches is just time, right? I mean, Norvell, we talked about him, where at first in his tenure it looked like it was going to be a bit bumpy. They didn't know if he was going to last, and boom, he's turned around. They gave him just enough time to kind of get things going. And we'll see if Cristobal has afforded that or not. I think if you go 8-4 for Miami this year, you would take that, you let him get to that next year, and see what happens.
I would hope so, but I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, Miami's one of those weird jobs that
when big money's involved, for the boosters,
exactly.
You never know.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a shot of it, and that's always kind of one of those scary things about those big jobs. But switching gears to NC State here, NC State 11th year under Dave Doeren, 8-5 last year. Brennan Armstrong comes in as the quarterback, the transfer from Virginia. And Armstrong, he's had some ups and downs, to say the least. He's had his moments where he looks great. He's had his moments where he has just absolutely struggled. And he'll get a shot to play his former team pretty early in the year. Yeah, going back to Charlottesville. We'll have to see how that game turns out. But NC State, Tyler, how many times have you heard me say NC State's a weird team? NC State is a team that, every time you look at it, it makes absolutely no sense how they're constructed. We've talked about this before. When you get quarterbacks that transfer in and out and you think that you've got opportunities to make something go, okay, we've got Devin Leary. Well, he goes to Kentucky, so we bring in Brennan Armstrong. You're playing quarterback roulette here. NC State has good pieces on defense. They're still solid there in that area. The problem is they lack consistency. And, I mean, that's just NC State to a T. We lack consistency.
Right.
Here's the thing, Tyler, and I mean, I was joking with you about this, but it honestly was. They could lose to UConn and beat Notre Dame,
Right.
and then go to overtime with VMI. That 3-week span, I would just look at that and just think that's normal, because that's just what NC State does.
Yeah.
They are play to your competition, but it gets results. I mean, you saw last year, they went 8-5. They nearly lose to East Carolina the first game of the season, and they come out and give Clemson a dogfight for a while in a defensive game. That's just who they are. And I think we'll see them do well again. It wouldn't shock me to see another, 8-9 win season. Maybe you get an almost big upset somewhere here or there. You get Clemson for homecoming near Halloween weekend. There's your prime example of the big game right there. We'll have to see with NC State, but as always, they're not going to be consistent. I don't expect them to be consistent. 8 and 9 wins is always where they're going to be if you can't do that. That's your ceiling for an inconsistent team.
Yeah, and, I think their biggest issue, and it was kind of a issue last year that fed into that inconsistency. Offensively, at times, they just sputter,
They do.
They shouldn't, but they do, and I don't know if that's going to be fixed this year with Brendan Armstrong. I'm not sure that that's going to be fixed. I'm hoping that is, but I just, and the schedule's not horribly tough. I mean, North Carolina and Clemson both at home. One on the road, then one out. No, both those at home. Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, so both those at home, that helps, but talent-wise, you're probably not good enough there in Notre Dame. You imagine get them at home again. I mean, theoretically, in the weird NC State world, as you're talking about, maybe you pull off one of those victories, but maybe you slip on one of these road games you shouldn't, like Virginia Tech or Wake Forest, right? I mean, it's just NC State's kind of a mixed bag of sometimes you're going to see the good, sometimes you see the bad. They're a Jekyll and Hyde type of team, and they haven't been able to shake that for whatever reason.
No, it's just something that's always haunted them. I don't know why. It's just something that, I mean, it's not even a Dave Doran problem. It's just a university problem. I don't know what it is with them. But getting to one of the rivals of NC State, looking at Duke, Mike Elko, year 1, 9-4.
Yeah.
Just coming in, changing everything up here at Duke, able to get some good defensive players in as well. Able to get some talent offensively. I mean, you've got Jordan Waters and Jalen Calhoun that are great offensive weapons. You've got Dwayne Carter on the defensive line, Brandon Johnson flying around in the secondary making plays. Duke's a weird team this year. I mean, I look at that Monday night game against Clemson, Tyler, and I look at that thing and I go, the more I stare at that game, you give Duke time. It's a home game. They can make that a game, Tyler. They can absolutely come out guns a-blazing and try to catch Clemson off guard. Game 1 with a new offense for Clemson. Cade Klubnik making his first start going on the road to Wallace Wade, which is one of those, what I like to call sleepy little stadiums, where it doesn't look intimidating. It's more of you just kind of, okay, this isn't a cozy place, but this isn't intimidating. It just kind of lulls you into insecurity, and then boom, that's when it happens.
I hear some
sipping
going on there.
A little bit.
But I'm with you. Look at this team, man. There's some if there's a team out of the rest of that group after your top two and then after North Carolina, this team is the one I kind of have picked as a little bit my dark horse because they returned 17 starters. You talk about all the talent they've got on both sides of the ball, plus they bring back Riley Leonard, quarterback, who is a guy that really popped a bit last year in spots and I think is kind of under the radar. Are they going to sneak up on people maybe as easily as they did last year? No. You don't just overlook a 9-1 team. Is their schedule a bit tough? You start out with Clemson. Yes, that's tough. You got to go to Florida State. You got to go to North Carolina. And really at Louisville, that could be – some of those road games could be just not necessarily tough, but just tougher when you got to play it immediately after Florida State or at Virginia immediately after North Carolina. So the schedule doesn't do me any favors, but, man, like you said, they come out firing against Clemson and kind of catch Clemson off guard. Like you said, when Clemson's still trying to figure things out early in the season under the new OC, you get past that game, the next real challenge, you get Notre Dame, obviously. That's going to be homecoming night at home there, so you're going to try to get up for that one. Tough schedule, but, man, if you could get, 2 of the 3 against Florida State, Notre Dame, and Clemson somehow, and probably primarily Notre Dame, Clemson, that'd be big. I mean, that'd give you a lot of momentum. Will it happen? Probably not, but boy, it'd be fun if it did. It'd be real fun. Man.
My prediction on this, if you give me the 4 big ones here, of Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida State, North Carolina, I think Duke wins one of those.
And that gets you back to 9 wins because I think the rest of those games, they are definitely talented enough. We talked about the returning starters. They should have enough talent to definitely win the rest of those games on paper at least. And, if you could get one of those big 3 or one of those big 4 like you're talking about, I should say, that puts you at 9 wins. And then conference-wise, depending on which one of those wins it is, could put you, in the hunt maybe.
Yeah, Duke's one of those teams that this year, I mean, there's a
Watch
lot of
out.
excitement
Could be
there.
a sleeper.
They could absolutely sneak up on someone in Louisville. Jeff Brom, first year. Louisville went 8-5 last year. Louisville's a weird mixed bag because they're a team that you look at their start, you look at their first 4 games, Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana, and Boston College. That's pretty simple enough. Those are all winnable games. Once that train gets going at Louisville, once they get a little bit of momentum, this is how Louisville kind of is. I mean, we see this, in most of their sports. That NC State game then becomes pivotal.
Yeah.
Because you win that game 5-0, Notre Dame comes to town. All of a sudden, your atmosphere is shifted from just normal game day to insane. We've seen what happens when Clemson comes there and Florida State comes there. That place can get wild.
Oh, yeah.
As quick as possible. And then you've got Jeff Brom, who is at Purdue, a master of the upset, Tyler.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying, if Louisville can get off to a good start, I think they can shock some people. They've got some weapons, but it's going to depend on just riding with Brock Doman. If he can get the start at quarterback again, we'll see if he can just stay accurate at all, if he could just keep going, go with the flow. Louisville's got an opportunity to make some people a little worried in the ACC, but at the same time, I could see everything, maybe they trip up in a game they shouldn't. Maybe, Indiana somehow just surprises them in Indianapolis,
Right.
and everything can just fall apart just like that.
So, the one thing on the quarterback position, I think Jack Plummer will contend there for that starting spot as well because he is familiar with Braun. Remember, he was at Purdue, left to go to Cal, and now he's reunited with Braun here. So he may win that job just because of the familiarity there. I think either quarterback, they're probably about the same. I think it's going to come down to camp who's showing they could be the better decision maker. But just as a whole, Louisville, you talk about a mixed bag. They're replacing a lot. They went aggressive in the portal. You got Jeff Brom back as alma mater. It's excitement there.
Mm-hmm.
And the schedule, kind of works out. They don't have to play Clemson. No Florida State. No North Carolina. Now, got to play Kentucky at the end of the season. That one's tough, obviously. Notre Dame, you mentioned that one. And then that at Miami game could be tough. Duke, even though you're hosting that one. Those 4 are probably the big 4 for them if you look at the schedule. But, other than that, even if you lose all 4 of those, I think 8-4 is achievable again, and kind of being right there in the mix. Like I said, if you get out to a good start and things are coming together quickly for Coach Brom, a lot of moving pieces, then you never know what could happen when you host that Notre Dame team that is going to get off, in there, and it's going to be a fight. It's not going to be an easy game. I definitely don't expect Louisville to lay down at any point this season.
And that's the thing that just is intriguing about Louisville this year because, I mean, we're talking about their schedule. You mentioned Kentucky and Notre Dame. Those are non-con games.
Exactly.
I mean, exactly. You've got your 2 biggest games of the year don't impact your chance at going to the ACC championship game.
Yep.
And remember, of course, there's no divisions now, so it's a free-for-all for everybody. So, I mean, your biggest game of the year theoretically in conference is Duke at home, is your homecoming game, coming off a bye week.
Right.
Everything sets up really nicely for Louisville here, that they could be another 8, maybe even a 9-win team if they can get all the right improvements.
Well, that's the thing. It's just how quickly can those teams come together in year 1 under Coach Brom, right? If it comes together quick, watch out, man. That could be, like you've mentioned, things start rolling. That could be tough to stop, especially with the schedule.
And that brings us to Pitt. Speaking of teams that can get rolling at the right time or fall apart at the right time, Pat Narduzzi, his 10th year at Pitt. Pitt went 9-4 last year, and they've got a transfer quarterback of their own in Phil Jerkovic, who was at Boston College. I mean, he was known as the guy who almost was, I guess is the best way to put him, several times. Boston College, they'd play someone, he'd come out, play a gutsy performance, but, it just wouldn't be good enough. Boston College would come out, play well for a half, and just could not get the thing done. But Pitt this year, you look at their schedule, and they get a nice first half, I'd say. Your big game in the first half before your bye is North Carolina. West Virginia, obviously, a rival. You have Virginia Tech there. But then you get out of that bye week, it's Louisville and Wake, and then you hit Notre Dame and Florida State back-to-back, which is just brutal to do. Then you get the Yankee Stadium game against Syracuse, and then Boston College, you come back home, and then you go to Duke. So a little bit more brutal in the second half. But Pitt is one of those teams that if they can just get rolling early, who knows what they can do. They're such a momentum-based team, in my opinion, Tyler. They're one of those – they can, anything they put their mind to, they can do. We've seen them down so many weird teams as a program, no matter guys, filling in and out. But we've seen them lose so many games where you're just sitting there going, there's no way you should lose that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think the problem for them in the schedule, the early part of it, really, North Carolina is the biggest challenge. Other than that, I'd say winnable games before the bye week, right? But coming off that bye week, the only real game that I think you could count them to get is probably Boston College. But then again, Boston College always just didn't, even if they're down, they play people tough and they could kind of eke a couple out that they shouldn't. That stretch after the bye week, starting with Louisville on down through the end of it is not very favorable. I mean, I know Wake Forest is down this year, but it's not like Pitt's just blowing everybody out of the water. So you're on the road there. Got to turn around and play Notre Dame, like you mentioned. Then you answer that with Florida State. So Pitt's kind of I'm not too high on them just because I think there's too many question marks defensively, and that was a strength for them last year. Lost a lot there. Offensively, I don't know if they're going to recover enough to match what could be a little bit of a down defense. Hate to say it, but I could see Pitt just falling short of a bowl game maybe. Now, they could also get over the hump and be right over there at that 6-7 win mark. I'm not sure if I put them too much higher than that.
And that's where I have Pitt. I have them, at max, probably a 7-win team. Yeah. I think they're more, 6-7, somewhere in that zone. I could see them getting off to maybe a 4-1 start. They get that bye week. They lose to Louisville, and then everything starts to slowly spiral from there. That's just kind of how Pitt is. I don't think their offense is going to be as good. I don't think their defense is going to be as good. You mentioned that. I think Pitt just takes a step back as a whole this year. Speaking of teams that offensively probably going to take a step back, Wake Forest. You lose Sam Hartman to Notre Dame. You still got Dave Clawson as your coach. You went 8-5 last year. It's going to be an interesting time for the Demon Deacons because, my goodness, when you lose someone of that caliber who was able to just play great for them, and I mean bring Wake to the point where they were able to go toe-to-toe with people that you would – it's been a while since we've seen them do that. But having to bounce back this year is going to be a challenge for them.
All right, so it's propaganda time. We're in that phase for
we're in that phase.
ACC teams down here at the bottom. Schedule-wise, first we got to address that for them. Clemson, yeah, you're not one of that. Florida State, you're not one of that. Probably not one at Duke or Notre Dame. So there's 4 probably built-in losses. I think we could agree on that. Vanderbilt early. We talked about Vanderbilt in the SEC preview. That's probably not an easy game either, straight away. But you got, 2 just Old Dominion on the road. I don't think Old Dominion's too solid, so winnable. You could probably realistically, at worst, be 2-2 into the bye week.
Yeah.
And maybe 3-1. Maybe you just lose to Vanderbilt. I think it's a little tougher, but Mitch Griffiths, Griffiths is the guy that's replacing Sam Hartman there. Jamal Banks, Taylor Morton, Donovan Green. That's a great trio of receivers. The issue is offensively for them, line may be a bit shaky. Defensively, they were really bad last year and still won the games they won. So as long as the defense finds some improvement, you figure that's going to help a lot. It's just after that bye week, can you handle that stretch run there of at Clemson, at Virginia Tech, Pitt, Florida State, at Duke? That's kind of, makes or breaks where they're at in the season. I think NC State, Syracuse, obviously winnable games. Probably not beat Notre Dame, as we mentioned, but I think this team could, if things fall right, maybe you get to 8 wins again. I think you're in that spot. Don't think you're beating Clemson. Don't think you're beating Florida State, Notre Dame, or Duke. So I think the rest, though, you could argue winnable. I don't see Wake Forest slipping back, I guess is what I'm saying, as far as everybody thinks they might.
See, I don't think they'll slip, completely into a 4 or 5 win territory by any means. But I mean, I look at it, that whole stretch after the bye week, say they're 3-1, you lose to Clemson, Florida State, Duke, Notre Dame. Let's just throw those 4 right there. So that'd be 3-5 when we're adding the top in those 4 there. Virginia Tech, I think it's placing just right after Clemson. You just played a physical Clemson team that's going to rough you up a bit. I could see them getting off to a slow start and losing that game, kind of similar to what they did against Louisville, where you have one where you're in it, you make turnover after turnover after turnover, or just stop after stop after stop on offense where you're just piddling and everything just goes completely wrong. Pitt, I think they can win that. That's a home game for them. I think that's a winnable game. NC State is going to be one of those weird ones because that's a rivalry game. NC State, the defensive NC State versus the offensive Wake Forest, and then the matchup, no one wants to see the offensive NC State versus the defensive Wake Forest, where that might be, one side can't stop the other, and maybe the offense will stop itself at that point. Who knows? But Wake Forest, I think they're a 6-7 win team. If they get back to 8, it wouldn't surprise me, but I think they're more kind of piddling around 500 this year.
8-4. Book it.
Okay. You're booking it. All righty. Well, moving on to Syracuse. Dino Babers is in his 8th year with the Orange, 7-6 last year. They still have Garrett Schrader at quarterback. It's going to be interesting for the Orange because you look at their first 4 games, Tyler. Colgate, Western Michigan, at Purdue, and Army. Those are all winnable games. And then you get Clemson at home. We know what happens when Syracuse plays Clemson, Tyler. It gets weird. Syracuse will probably lose, but it'll be weird for a little bit. Then you go to North Carolina, then you go to Florida State. Then you get a bye. Once you've weathered the storm of the 3 heavy hitters, it's smooth sailing from there on out. But the only challenge is what, Wake Forest, really? If you're Syracuse, I could see Syracuse maybe having an 8 or 9 win season if everything goes right. Probably more like 7 or 8, maybe even 6. It'll be weird to see for Syracuse. They're one of those teams that every year I look at them, I think they should be better than they are. They always play really well early on in the season. They have that 1 or 2 games that slip away, and then everything falls apart. I think having all 3 of them in a row probably, in all honesty, dooms them. You had your Wake Forest propaganda. I'm going to do my Syracuse propaganda. Syracuse is winning at least 8 games this year.
Ooh.
It's happening.
They're
turning it around.
I don't see a 1-1 improvement with everything they lost there. I really think there's a chance those 3 weeks right there, we got to play Clemson, North Carolina, and Florida State. Oh, my God.
It's brutal.
That is rough, man. And that could really – I'm not saying that the guys are going to get injured, but that could put your team into kind of a downward spiral. Yes, you get the bye week to kind of recollect, but I don't think you're that much better than anybody after that bye week. Like, I think you're very much right there in terms of talent with them, if not, in some cases, a little worse. But Boston College is probably the easiest one there, I would say. But I could see this team easily slipping back to 5-7, 4-8.
See, and that's the thing about Syracuse. Nothing would surprise me with them, Tyler. Could they go 4-8? Possibly.
Yeah.
I just have a little bit more faith in them.
I've got 0.
It's probably misplaced faith, to be honest, but I have faith.
They're losing to Colgate. No, I'm kidding.
If they lose to Colgate, that'd be something right there. That would be embarrassing. But Virginia Tech, the next team on the list here, Brent Pry in his 2nd year after going 3-8 last year. Virginia Tech, it's one of those, they have fallen. They have fallen a lot, and their first game is going to be fascinating, Tyler, because Old Dominion has kind of filled that role of the in-state team that gives Virginia a hard time. For whatever reason, Old Dominion, the last 2 times Virginia Tech's gone out there to Norfolk to play them, they've lost. Now they're back in Blacksburg, battling them again. Old Dominion's going to throw everything they have at them.
Yeah, and you know what, for me, see, Virginia Tech's the team where I'm just like, I'm not sure if anything would necessarily surprise me with them. We look at the schedule, you get Florida State on the road, you're not winning that. But the rest of the schedule, I mean, yeah, there's tough road games like at Louisville on there. But, I mean, other than that, you're hosting probably the teams that you'd be more concerned about. Somebody like a Pitt, Wake Forest. It shakes well for them in the schedule. It's just can they take advantage of that, right? Like you said, it's kind of fallen off the rails a little bit for them. They were uncharacteristically bad on offense last year, pretty sluggish. I don't know where to put this team at. Obviously I think best case scenario, they're kind of middle of the ACC, and I consider that success for them. But it could either be really off the rails or it could just be so-so.
And I think their ceiling's like a 6-6 type year if you get everything to break their way. But looking at it, there's a possibility they could just lose to Old Dominion the first game and it just collapses the entire season.
Yeah.
And we're talking about another 3-win Virginia Tech team.
That's just kind of what I'm worried about with them right there.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to see that, but, I mean, that's just where they're at, where there's a lot of holes to fill, and you can only do so much of that in the off season. And some of that's just it's natural. You got to take a couple seasons to fill it, and hopefully that gets turned around, but it's not easy, man.
No, they're trying to do everything they can out there, but it's a rough climb back up. Speaking of teams that know a bit about trying to climb their way back up, Brent Key at Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets went 5-7 last year. Brent Key was 4-4 in his 8 games he coached as the interim. And Georgia Tech, they have the kickoff game against Louisville. They get that Friday night special there in front of everybody. And Georgia Tech, they're one of those teams that I have no earthly idea. I mean, Haynes King at quarterback is not the most positive sign in the world, and that's something that could be a bit entertaining at times, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but we'll have to see how that one ends up playing out. But, Tyler, I think you were the one who had some positive things to say about the Yellow Jackets, or at least you were giving me the smirk earlier that you did.
Okay, so they went 4-4 over the last 8 games, right? It was a disaster start to the season. Changed things up. Saw some positive growth from that. Get some transfers. I know Haynes Keen is not a guy that you would think, oh, this is a program-changing quarterback. But from what they had and what they're trying to now establish, I think he's an improvement. So the problem is, obviously, the schedule doesn't do him any favors. You're on the road against Clemson. You got to play North Carolina. You got to play Ole Miss early in the season. You're at the road. On the road against Wake Forest and Miami. So there's some tough games there. But, if you could just take advantage of some of that second half of the season, if you will, growth, and then get some of those things to come together early in the season, you could be looking at a Georgia Tech team that puts themselves, maybe in that 7-win range. Obviously, the ceiling is not very high. It's not like they're going to turn around and compete for an ACC championship. I don't think they're pushing above 7 wins, but I think you could really see things take off in a better direction just because it was such a disaster at points last year. You can only go up from here is what I think for Georgia Tech.
See, I'd like to think so, Tyler, but, I mean, I look at this schedule. I'm trying to find wins on this thing, and I can find you 4 to 5. I don't know if I can find you a 6th, and I don't know if I can really find you a 7th unless we're taking some, liberties here of some upsets, but that I just can't see personally happening. Unless Georgia Tech goes on that kind of crazy run like they did at the end of the year, start playing well again, I can't find 7. I can find 5. I don't think I can find 7.
Okay, so here's my process. You get Louisville at home, both teams trying to, under a new regime, so to speak.
Yeah.
That one's a coin flip. I really believe that at this point. You could take that one. Obviously, SC State, you could take that one. Those next 2, probably a loss. Bowling Green should be a win. I won't give them Miami. I think Miami could take that one. Bye week should be Boston College. You lose North Carolina. Virginia, winnable game. Virginia's not going to be very good. They might be worse than Boston College. You get smacked by Clemson. At home against Syracuse, that could be that pivotal 6 win right there. I think that could be it. You're not being Georgia, obviously.
Yeah.
But, those games that are not those 6 I mentioned are winnable. You have to win them all, though. That's kind of the trick.
Yeah.
Will they do that? I don't know, but I think that's possible. And then the 7th could be Miami if things are really off the rails, in Miami. But just for now, I'd say 6 is kind of – they could get that. They've done what they needed to do with the schedule, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
And that will move us on to Boston College. The Eagles, Jeff Hafley in his 4th year, 3-9 last year for BC. And BC's one of those teams that we mentioned it earlier. They'll play people hard. They'll always give people a game up there at Chestnut Hill. But, man, there's just – it might be another rough year for Boston College. I mean, you look at the schedule. Yes, Northern Illinois. Holy Cross could be a fun game. Holy Cross is a good FCS team. They've had some fun the last few years. That's a little bit of a rivalry there going back to the 50s and 40s, kind of not what you think about. And then you get Florida State right after. You got to deal with Army on the road, which is a little bit of a change of pace from everything you're used to. And that's really it, though. I mean, you look at it, Florida State's the big game, obviously. You dodge a Clemson. You dodge someone like that. You don't play North Carolina either. You don't deal with Duke. If you can get past that Florida State game, mainly injury-free, you have an opportunity to play some of those similar-minded teams kind of fighting for that middle of the pack there.
Here's the problem, though. For me, at least, personally, I feel that Boston College and then Virginia is going to fall in this vein where they're just kind of really lagging behind the rest of the conference. Just on paper with the talent, man, there's not much there to work with is the problem right now. And we kind of saw that last year with Boston College where, you don't bring as stout of a defense as you're used to, and your offense just isn't there. It doesn't go well, man. You just get pushed over because even if your defense is fighting the entire time and you're kind of making people stress it a bit, eventually you get worn out. I mean, we've talked about this with other teams where if you can't string together first downs and give the defense a rest, it's going to be tough, And I just don't see much on paper for this Boston College team. Now, their non-con puts them in a spot where, maybe they could, beat NIU, Holy Cross. Maybe that's a fun game, but they pull it out. Army on the road. Okay, you're on the road. That's tough. Could still win that one. And then UConn could be a dub. So maybe you get to 4 and you technically improve by a win. But I think that's best case scenario. I don't see really much else on that schedule that screams like, hey, Boston College is going to be a favorite in this game, of course, barring any injuries or things of that nature.
And that's kind of my line of thinking with Boston College. 4 wins is probably the best they're going to get. More than likely 3. They might lose at Army. That seems one of the more likely ones there. But if Boston College is showing any improvement, and I mean, you mentioned it, it's already a depleted team anyways, just trying to find anything you can, just trying to be desperate for any win, they'll take it. I mean, who wouldn't take a win?
Yeah, they just, the deal with them, they're one of those teams that have to develop, the talent that they get because they're not going to have any advantage of recruiting or NIL or things of that nature. So we'll see if that happens. I mean, they're kind of in a downslope of a time after they had some good years there not too long ago. It's tough to string it together when you're a school with limited resources.
It is, and that brings us to the final team, Virginia. The Cavaliers here. Tony Elliott in his second year. Virginia obviously went 3-7 last year. You got to give a shout out to a guy named Tony Muskett at quarterback. That's an all-name.
Monmouth.
Yeah, I know, from Monmouth. You get an FCS transfer. That's another all-name team.
Oh yeah, Tony Muskett on Virginia. That's match made in heaven.
It absolutely is. I mean, it's one of those, you got to love it. But unfortunately, Virginia, I don't think they're going to like this season. You start with Tennessee. That's already a bad sign. James Madison, game 2. That's
very good.
That's not a good sign either. And then you go to Maryland, NC State, and you're right down the list of possibly looking at an 0-4 start. At least 1-3, I would think. Maybe you find a way to squeak out James Madison, but I don't think so.
James Madison. They're
you never know.
State.
You never know.
I'm telling you, that James Madison team's legit.
Oh, I know they are.
Last year, they brought back a lot.
That is true.
It's immersive. They're not winning that game.
You never know.
They're starting 0-3. Booking it.
Okay. I mean, they're going to start pretty bad anyways. Looking at it here, Boston College and William and Mary, Are there 2 wins I can find that are obtainable?
Yeah.
And then, maybe you get lucky against someone else in there and get a 3rd win, but that's about all I could think of.
Yeah, that's the only upside. Like I said, I don't see this team getting beyond that. Again, Coach Elliott, 2nd year now, had to come in, fix Real Miss. It was ugly. It'll probably be, unfortunately, a bit uglier this year. You're in that spot where we've talked about with some of these other teams. You just got to start finding some guys that can be contributors on a consistent basis and show, hey, next year, year after, we can start really stepping up because that's what you're looking for at this point. Find some difference makers, find some X factors. And if you do that, that's positive. Unfortunately, it's just not going to come with a lot of wins. I mean, it's just not right now for Coach Elliott.
I mean, it's brutal, but unfortunately that is life at the bottom of the ACC right now. But taking a look at our non-ACC, ACC member, Notre Dame. Notre Dame obviously getting to start a week earlier than everyone else. They got that fun Ireland game against Navy. I think everyone's excited to see that. I know I will. It means football's back a week earlier,
Absolutely.
Tyler. But then Tennessee State at NC State, Central Michigan, Ohio State at Duke. You play Louisville, USC, Pitt, Clemson. I mean, it's a stacked schedule, Tyler. They got, all the big games you can want to see Notre Dame playing, they've got them.
Yeah, and, they got some games in there that, Ohio State game obviously going to be really tough. At Duke is sneaky tough. USC, of course, would be tough, and then Clemson. Those are your games right there that I'm circling for Notre Dame is, where will they land? I mean, I don't want to say they could lose all 4 of those games because I'm not, I don't want to overhype Duke per se, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that will be a challenging game. I think realistically, probably 9-3. I find it hard to believe that they're going to beat USC, Clemson, Ohio State. I think the most likely one, as weird as it sounds, would probably be, even though it's on the road, maybe Clemson, because maybe things just aren't quite up to snuff on that offense like we saw last year with them. But even then, defense can be tough. That being said, though, Notre Dame's kind of exceeded some of those expectations sometimes in the past few years on me. But Coach Ream's got to start putting it together, man. He's got to start really churning it out because it's a tough act to follow with Brian Kelly and what he did at Notre Dame.
Yeah, and then that's the thing with Notre Dame. I think they're more looking like a 9-win team this year. Notre Dame's going to be one of those weird teams, I feel like, because the talent's there. And, I mean, this is every year with Notre Dame. We saw it last year even. You had the loss to Marshall, and then just the pinpoint of the Marshall game and the Clemson game. And just that's the progression of 2 months as a team.
Yeah.
That just what Notre Dame was able to accomplish in that short of time, just going from laughing stock to, giant killer, which is weird saying Notre Dame being the giant killer.
Sure.
That situation. But it wouldn't surprise me if you saw them get up for one of those big games again. Like you said.
Well, they do that well, right?
Yeah, they do
get up for those games.
They do. And, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Ohio State, they're going to be alive for that one. USC, they're going to be up for that one. At Clemson, that's going to be a big game. They're going to play well. They know they can beat that type of team. It's just, can they actually do it?
Yeah.
And, I mean, unfortunately for them, probably not. I think those teams are just a bit above where Notre Dame is. But still, 9-3, you're still trying to build things around here if you're Coach Freeman. But this is Notre Dame. You don't really have the time to build things around.
No, and I think he's got to try to shoot for double digits. If he could get to 10 wins, I think that would be a really good season for him. Maybe they sneak that out and get that, but I don't see them being able to escape the schedule with just one loss, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they need to probably compete for a national championship or have a chance at the playoff, so to speak. I think at best 10 wins. You want to avoid that 8-4 or worse. If you get to 9, it's probably acceptable, but they got to try to shoot for 10. It'll be tough.
It will be, but it will be a fun season, Tyler. That is the only thing I can guarantee because, folks, we've made it. If you watched all 5 of these videos, you're a trooper.
Thank you.
Pat yourself on the back. And before we get out of here, of course, as always, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button, and leave a comment. I would love to hear what y'all have to say about, do you agree with us, disagree with us? share your propaganda for your team below. Like Tyler said, is your team going to be the best one? We have no idea. We're still waiting, folks.
Okay, do we want to drop a quick national championship playoff prediction real quick here, Nugget, at the end?
I don't know if we need to do that right now, Tyler. I mean, it's one of those. The thing about it is like, well, I already did that. I already said Georgia back in the SEC preview would probably march all the way again. So there you go. There's my if you want to do a pick, I'm just going Georgia. I'm picking easy street here.
You're ready for this? I'm just gonna drop my playoff.
You're just gonna drop the whole playoff.
So yeah, we'll take Georgia.
Okay.
Taking Florida State to get to the playoff.
Okay.
Taking Michigan.
Okay.
And the fourth team. Sipping that Kool-Aid. Give me Texas.
Okay.
Oh no.
Okay.
But yeah, Georgia overall still gonna be too talented.
Yeah, that's what I kind of figured.
Talented.
We don't need a playoff. I'm just gonna pick Georgia.
Just Georgia.
Just simple
No
as
dollars.
that. But folks, as always, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, have a good one, everybody.